Welcome to Neutral Exposure, a space for reflection and inspiration with photographers across a range of disciplines. My name's Al Simmons.
It's interesting actually. Moving down here had an impact on my work for sure. I think the visibility on social media, people realise that everybody kind of figures out sooner or later that you're in Cornwall, and then they don't really think that you're available anymore. So it's quite challenging to keep reminding people, that actually you can still be there in less than less than 6 hours. I can be in London. I can be there for first thing in the morning if I catch the sleeper. You wouldn't even notice the difference really, other than from a client perspective. But that doesn't, it's like a constant battle of trying to remind people that you don't. Everything's so London centric that the minute you step out of it, everybody thinks you're not available anymore.
Yeah.
It's crazy,
I remember chatting to someone who was saying, that sometime in the 90s, he had a studio up in like Leamington Spa or somewhere, and some client called him and he said where the studio was, and they just put the phone down. It was like, he's joking.
Yeah, I mean that sounds about right. But as a consequence, actually, it's made me rethink. Like how I approach my business. Like, what do I want to do with the majority of my time from a work perspective? And I started working. Because of that, I reached out to a local chef down here who's got quite a good presence. He's got a cookbook and doing quite well. And I started working quite closely with him and produced a project about based around his practice, which is in the rural part of Cornwall. Even more remote than most places, and the sustainability of the local produce and how he employs that in his own practice. So that's been quite interesting and really rewarding actually. It's opened up quite a few doors locally speaking, and the rewards for living down here is community. Like I've met and become friends with more people in the short space of time I lived in here than I did in 5 years of living in London.
Yeah, it's the upside.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah, and in terms of other photographers, is there anyone else kind of on your level down there?
Well, yeah, I think there's actually some really talented people down here. It's a different ball game to what I've been used to. Even before I lived in London, I was up in Leeds. When you live in a city, there's a full range of clients to match the full range of photographers. From budding amateur to just gone professional to seasoned lifetime pro, and there's budgets to match that, clients to match that. Like there's a band who might want a portrait for 50 quid. There's a restaurant who might want a menu shooting for 250 quid. Like as well as all the big agency stuff. And in Cornwall, that doesn't really exist. In the southwest, essentially, what you have is one pool of clients and one pool of photographers, and so I might come along with all the experience of commercial work that I have, and it doesn't really mean anything. Being out here is a great leveler. It is the time you spent making those connections and those things, and local loyalty is really highly regarded. So actually breaking into the photography business down here is remarkably challenging compared to being in London.
Because you actually have to build up relationships.
Absolutely, yeah. It's very few people will look at my portfolio and go, absolutely smashing, let's book you, because they've already been using somebody for 2, 3, 5, 10 years.
Right.
And that's worth more than my experience. And I actually respect that massively because it might not be good. It might not be good for me, but loyalty, to get clients that are loyal to you is such a blessing that when somebody says that, then I'm like, well, good for you and good for that photographer, because that's a really beautiful thing.
Yeah.
You know, in the world that I've moved in before, loyalty is seemingly quite a fragile thing.
For sure, yeah. Especially if you get
Comes
used
and
to
goes.
how things operate in London, where it's
Yeah.
it's all reputation, no relationship.
Yeah, I mean, and also even if you think you've built a relationship in London, it can just disappear overnight because people get bored and move on, you know. And again, that's actually not something you can really argue about. I think that's just something you have to accept, and I certainly do, having been in the game long enough to have experienced all angles like that, for sure. So yeah, down here is quite a different thing. So the pool of photographers down here ranges from those people who work second jobs who really want to be photographers, but probably won't end up because there's not. I don't think there's enough work in Cornwall to sustain an exclusively Cornish photography business.
Right.
Like, if you can do that, it's a miracle. And I think that the people that do that supplement it with weddings. And again, I have maximum respect for wedding photographers. I think it's probably, if you're a good wedding photographer, you're probably one of the best photographers in the world because you know how to deal with almost every situation.
Yeah, and not miss opportunities.
Absolutely, yeah. But the stress of working weddings just isn't my bag at all. So yeah, I don't know. It's actually quite a challenge being a photographer down here in the southwest.
Yeah, but then I guess if you're from Leeds, I'm from Skipton, so
okay.
My
mum and dad were from Grassington.
Oh right. Well, my folks live in Connolly, so yeah, I've still got a foot in the north. But yeah, I guess Leeds must have been very kind of in comparison to London and then to Cornwall, kind of somewhere in the middle. Because there's very much a kind of you can build up quite a strong connection there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Leeds is where I built my career foundations. And that were, like my actual proper paid career was almost exclusively London based. But I wouldn't have got there without the foundations of being in Leeds, to be honest with you. Because when I started out, I right now I don't. If you went on my website right now, you wouldn't recognize the photographer that I was even say 5 years ago. Especially 5 years ago. Actually, 5 years ago I was 100% music photographer. But over the last 5 years, I don't know. I feel like I've kind of started to find the voice that I am as a photographer, and not just a music fan, which is how I started out, really.
Yeah. I think you can definitely see that. I mean, I saw the work that you were shooting when you were, solely a music photographer, because I mean that was the first kind of thing that got me to pick up a camera. It was shooting live music, and it was folks like you and Tom Barnes, who I spoke to a couple of weeks ago as well. But it was like it was your work that was just like, this is what this is what you aim for if you're shooting live music.
Yeah, so all that kind of kicked off for me up in Leeds, because that's where I lived, and I've been playing in bands. The time I picked up a camera, I think I was playing in 3 bands. I was doing the front of house for a working men's club band, and I was promoting gigs at the Brudenell Social Club in Leeds.
Institution.
Yeah, and a few other venues around town, and I started photographing all those things that I was doing and involved with, and it turned out that I really enjoyed photography, and I never thought of it as anything other than just another creative voice. Really, I never took it quite seriously until I suppose I had a massive fallout with the band that I was in, and we broke up, and it was incredibly acrimonious, and it made me put my bass down, and it kind of broke my heart a little bit. So at that time, photography had already been bubbling away in the background, and all that energy and all that angst and all that, like, I don't know. For me, I'd only ever wanted to be a musician since I was 12, and I'd done, I'd worked a lot of part-time shitty jobs based around trying to be a musician. So I had no intention or even any skill set to speak of And I didn't even have a frame of mind to think differently. I just started photographing because it was something I was enjoying, and I became quite heavily involved in the Leeds music scene because there was a fanzine out at the time called Sandman, and that was really popular in Leeds. And that gave me a place, to create, and it came from there really. And as soon as I did that for quite a few years, like 3 or 4 times a week, I was out shooting for this fanzine. And I never really considered payment of any type or money, because it just was something I was loving, and everybody was in the same boat, all unsigned bands and a free fanzine, so everybody was doing, contributing through the love of music. And then out of the blue, I got a phone call from the NME one day saying that they'd heard that I was the go-to photographer in the north of England for live music, for bands, whatever. And that's how that...
First I've heard about it, but thanks.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of was like that. Like seriously, like, it was such... Being a part of that community back then was so awesome, that, like, it just felt like you were part of a community. It never felt like anyone, I never felt like I was a photographer for such a long time. I just felt like I was doing something I loved within, within music. So yeah, when they call me,
I can relate to that. Like being in a band, and then when that finishes, still wanting to be part of that scene.
Yeah,
it is a brilliant thing.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, so like my career foundations are absolutely in Leeds, but then as soon as the NME called, I was able to, after shooting for them for about 6 months, I was able to quit my day job and go full-time professional. And so for like 4 or 5 years, almost exclusively, my paycheck was from the NME, and due to that London-centric lack of decent geography, everybody thought the north of England started at Nottingham and ended at Inverness. So I was blessed, absolutely blessed, and so lucky to have that opportunity. And and I took it with both hands and ran with it. It was pretty awesome. I was out shooting 3 or 4 times a week, from doing demo unsigned bands to doing bigger printed stuff in a weekly magazine every like say 3 or 4 times a week for them.
Yeah. Do you remember what that first gig was that they called?
I do actually. Yeah. I say I can't speak with absolute certainty because I have shot thousands and thousands and thousands of bands now, but I'm pretty sure it was a Manchester band called The Whip, and it was in some sort of weird makeshift venue somewhere in Manchester. Because I used to go to Manchester so much. Like the places that would send me the most were Manchester and Glasgow. So yeah, and I'm pretty sure it was a Manchester band called The Whip. So it wasn't like they were good. They were lovely people actually, and I went on to meet and hang out with them, many times after that. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. And then you started shooting with the Kaiser Chiefs a lot. Was that a relationship that was built through NME, or were they friends from Leeds, or how did that come about?
That was a relationship built through the NME. To be honest with you, I weirdly I'd met. So I used to play in a band called Brody, and Brody, our EP.
I actually saw you guys.
Get out of town.
Yeah, honestly, I was about 12 or 13, maybe.
What? Where did you see us?
I want to say Joseph's Well, maybe.
Well, funnily enough, that's exactly what I was going to mention next.
Which I fucking missed. Joseph's Well was a great venue. It was,
yeah. The landlord of the Joseph's Well was a guy called Mido, who now is like a tour manager, travels all over the world. But he was such like a proper socialist within the music scene, and he did everything he could to help bands. And we were looking to put out a demo, and we couldn't afford it. So Mido was like, you know what? I'll set up a record label and I'll put it out for you. So he did, nice. And he put out a CD for us. And at that time, the bass player Simon and the keyboard player Peanut used to work from the Kaiser Chiefs. Used to work in the Well. Right. So the only time I'd ever spoken to them prior to like properly working with them was, I remember Oh My God had come out and it had blown up, and it had done remarkably well. And I think they'd even played Live 8, and they'd come back home after this like huge, like insane gig playing like live to like 7 million people on TV worldwide. And then they come back to pull a few pints behind the bar, and I think my band were playing that night. And I remember seeing Simon and saying to him like, "Oh, congratulations on single! It's doing really well. I hope that works out for you." And then within about 6 months, they'd sold 4.5 million copies in the UK alone.
It was a huge explosion. I remember.
It was, yeah. So that time, like that was like about, I don't know, that was a couple of years before I started shooting for the NME, because like I by the time I got to know them and started shooting for them, they were on their second record. So that was like, that was, like I said, just when the singles had come out, maybe 2005 when I saw them.
Something like that, yeah.
And then when I started working for them, that was 2007, and I'd shot them. I shot them at Glastonbury actually in 2007, and my first ever Glastonbury. It was probably the most horrific. I've been maybe 10 times now, and that was probably the most horrific one I've ever been to. The weather was like just rain from Thursday to Sunday. It was absolutely insane. And on the Sunday, traditionally all the NME writers and photographers all head back home, and they just leave a skeleton crew. And they were looking for volunteers, and being completely and utterly green, I was like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. And at the time, I didn't have a way to get home, but I was so excited just about being there. And it'd been a rough year. I'd lost my dad and everything. It'd been an incredibly difficult time for me. So like when these opportunities came to me, I absolutely fucking loved it. I just couldn't get my head around how lucky I was. So when they were like, okay, who wants to stay on Sunday? I thought it would be a fight. I thought everybody would be like, yeah, me. And I was like, me. And I was like the only person like
everyone else gone.
Yeah, and everybody was like, thank fuck for that. So I was looking around going, oh, is this not the lucky situation I thought it was? So anyway, there's just me and one journalist. But out of that, I basically, the last thing I had to photograph was the Kaiser Chiefs on the Pyramid stage. It was on the Sunday night, and the rain was fucking horrific, and I just remember it being epic. I loved it so much. Anyway, shot that. One of the photographs I got from that is probably the most important photograph I think I've ever taken from a personal point of view, because I used that to open doors with their management, and I hounded their management for maybe through to August, September. That was June. So like for about 3 months, I emailed and phoned and spoke to in person. Then I saw them at Wireless Festival when Wireless used to do up in Leeds, and then I saw them at Leeds Festival when they I think it was a Secret Set as a different band name, and I just kept pushing and pushing, and then he said, all right, I'll ask the band, and he put it to the band, who were in between photographers at the time. They'd always had a guy, but he'd moved to America, and they took me out on the road. And that changed everything, because what I'd realised in the time, I'd only been shooting for the magazine at that time, for about a year, and full time for about 6-7 months. I think what I realised was I couldn't have all my eggs in one basket, and even though most of my money was coming from there, I had to figure out a way, because I was actually 31 at the time. In fact, by the time I toured with the Kaiser Chiefs, I was 32, and all my peers were like, there was one person older than me at the magazine, and everybody else was around 24 years old. So I constantly felt on the back foot with like how much time I had to give it, and being pragmatic about it. Really, I thought to myself, by the time I'm 40, I might not actually want to be stood in welly high mud at Glastonbury carrying 15 kilos of lenses around with me.
Sure.
So I don't know. I used that.
Well, I guess also in that world, it's like you shoot until 11, but then you've got to finish the pictures.
Oh yeah, I mean that's not actually even true. Quite often, especially at Glastonbury, you shoot until the picture editor tells you to stop, which can be like 3 or 4 in the morning. And then there's a team meeting at 10 or 11, and then you're in your wellies for 14, 15 hours. Those are really long days. And even at regular festivals, yeah, that's more like you shoot until 11, but then you edit until probably 3 in the morning. Yeah, so I don't know. I forgot what my bloody point was. Oh yeah, I was just catching up with my peers. Just always like, so I was working. I tried to grab every opportunity I could whilst I could, and that Kaiser Chiefs thing, I saw it as probably one of the most big ones because it would get me out of being just an editorial photographer and be recognised in the industry as somebody who works for artists. And I think that was quite a big step for me.
Yeah. And it was all off the back of volunteering for that last night.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Which was awesome. I after I finished my edit, I tried to finish it as quick as I could. Chemical Brothers were closing the other stage, and because it was my first Glasgow, I'd always wanted to go and watch the closing band on the other stage because it was always like an electronic band that I loved, and so yeah, I went on my own, and the mud was like glue, and you couldn't really dance. You could just like bop your knees, and you couldn't dance anyway because it was about 2 inches from going over at top of your wellies. And I was on my own, and I stood there with a fag and a pint, and absolutely loved it. Felt like the next day was horrible. Like it took me 18 hours to get back to Leeds.
Bloody hell!
Yeah. So I never volunteered for a Sunday ever again without my own car.
You didn't need to. That first one was the only one that mattered. Yeah. Yeah. So how long were you on the road with the Kaiser Chiefs for after then?
Well, I mean, I've worked with them. I still work with them. I'd actually probably say they're more my friends these days than they are my clients, to be honest. On this last album that they did, I didn't actually do anything with them. I remember we for the album prior to this, we've done like press shoots and live shoots on everything. I think the last big thing I did with them, I actually shot a music video for them whilst they were on tour with Foo Fighters in South America, and that was a hell of a lot of fun. And then, so I guess that was like 3 or 4 years ago. And then on this new album cycle, I actually suggested to them a few years ago that it might be a good idea if they tried somebody else because like we'd been doing shit for so long that I was like, if you want some new creative energy, I think that it's okay to do that, you know. Like you feel you can be too protective of your own situation for your own good, and so yeah, I think this time they actually went out and got somebody else to do a shoot, which is probably a good thing. So I think that when you come back to it, you're a bit fresher. So yeah, so I guess I've been working like over a decade.
Nice.
Yeah, and I love it actually. When I go shoot with them, it's like going home. Oh no, the last thing I shot from was last year. They did Ellen Road, the 10th anniversary of when they first played it, and they got me along to do the photographs for that.
Nice. So then, was it a kind of how much longer were you based up in Leeds? You know, kind of what point did kind of London draw you down?
I mean, I was based up in Leeds for a hell of a long time actually. So that was like 2007. I didn't move to London until 2014.
Okay.
Yeah, so another 7 years. I because most of my work when I was working editorially was everywhere in the country and overseas. So I never, apart from the convenience of an airport being nearby, I never really had a reason to move to London. It was only when I got an agent and I started to have less editorial work and my work was more London based that it made sense for me to be there. And yeah, so that was like 2014. But I didn't particularly enjoy living in London, so I'm glad I was able to hold it off for as long as possible.
Was it a challenge to kind of shift away from just being known as a live music photographer?
Yeah, it was. I've always shot band portraits. Even back in when I was doing stuff for the zine, I was shooting band portraits, and I've always found it really immensely frustrating that I was never considered with equal merit a portrait photographer.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to get that recognition for that side of stuff. And actually, I feel like it was probably when in 2011 I actually got asked by Q magazine if I'd go shoot for those guys, and that was a real big moment for me because I'd grown up as a photographer at the NME, and I think I loved my picture editor there, Marion Patterson, and she was the person who called me and first gave me that opportunity. And when my old man died and I needed work, and I explained, I was like, I'm going out of my fucking mind. I need to be distracted. She was there for me, and she helped me and guided me, and she was awesome. However, I feel like because I went from being a very average, if not a little bit shit photographer under a wing, to being pretty good. Yeah. I feel like she still saw me as being a sort of a junior within the ranks of the NME, even though like I was treated as a veteran and all this shit. Like in terms of the gigs that I got to photograph, I feel like I was still kind of like she still had her favourites like Dean Chalkley and Tom Oxley.
Okay.
And so when Q magazine asked me if I'd go shoot for them, Jesus Christ, that was like breaking up with a girlfriend, like splitting up with the NME. It was such a hard decision to make. But I felt like it was a clean slate for me, and I was going in there without any, like, the only preconception that Russ had, the picture editor, was that I was a music photographer and that he loved what I did, and that and immediately the gigs I got with them were 50-50, equal portraits, equal like live stuff, but really good bands, like to do portraits with like Biffy, for example, or go to Tokyo and do a feature on St. Vincent, or I'd stepped up a level.
Yeah, and gone from junior to senior.
Yeah, and then that same year, that almost immediately, as soon as I started having like those gigs, and Rolling Stone called me and asked me to shoot a Foo Fighters cover with for them, and that I was like, okay, fucking hell, there's some momentum now, and my portraiture started to grow significantly around that at that point, and I got started. Yeah, I feel like people started to take me more seriously, which coincidentally, came around the same time as I got an agent, so that he was able to see that and then get more gigs based around the portraiture that I was doing. But it was still, incredibly music business based. Even though I was trying to get into the more commercial work at the time, that was a huge challenge that I'm still trying to crack that egg today, really. Like, I've got, obviously, if you look at my portfolio, I've got a few shoots in there that reflect that angle, but it's not. It's few rather than often, very few.
Yeah, I suppose it must get to a point where it takes a lot of energy to be a live music photographer.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's
a lot of stamina.
Yeah, and also, like I work. Another side of what I do is I run a business called Fanatic, and we do official photography for festivals and large events, and that started out as back in 2010 as something, a passion project and nothing else. It was just a way, because I always felt like photographers were always on their own, and I was trying to figure out a way to not be on my own, and I wanted to be around other photographers, and like I always felt I was inspired and worked harder, and that thing from the NME where we used to do like the NME Awards or Glastonbury or Leeds and Reading or Tea in the Park, and all the photographers would come together. The camaraderie was like so beautiful, and I wanted my own way of carrying that forward in my life. So that's when Fanatic started.
Okay.
And now that's grown into a much bigger business, and we have like 10 photographers freelance with us, and we shoot 20. Well, we did, obviously, Corona, we did 25 festivals, another 10, 15 like events and big like product launches and stuff like that. You know, it's really interesting business. But that was also like, as that was being immersed in the festival world, as well as like the live music world, what I realized was I didn't want to be doing that when I was my age that I am now, because it's a youthful thing. Like, I'm sure like some photographers will shoot me down, and you're welcome to, because like my opinion is not absolute. It's about how I feel. I'm not
Sure.
saying this is a rule, but I just didn't want to be the old guy with a camera taking photographs of perpetually young people. Like, there's an awkwardness to that I don't feel comfortable with. So and you're right. Like, and I don't mean like it's not just an age thing. It's actually an energy thing. Like, you know, when I bring on new photographers through Fanatic, and you know, we see young people coming through, and you see how they photograph and that energy, and it reminds me of like when I used to feel like that, and I just don't. I don't. Age is, you know, I have a 7-year-old kid. I am divorced. I've had to move out of London. I like a bit of gardening now. I love to cycle. You know, like I've evolved. I'm an older person. You know, like that, and I accept that, and I'm okay with that actually.
Yeah.
But part of that is being able to let go and let other people have a go. And
I think that makes total sense. You know, why would you, you know, as you change, why would you keep just pulling yourself towards the same subject all the time?
You can't. And also, the reality of a live music, you know, photographer or festival work, events, whatever, is the money's not amazing. You have to be really, really lucky to get a gig that is financially secure. And I'm yet to figure that one out, to be honest with you. And you know, so you do naturally. It's a young person when you've got less responsibilities, and you don't give a fuck about whether it's 200 quid or £2,000. You're just going to go out and do the job. That's, you know, you need that. You need not to give a fuck. And I have a lot less fucks to give. I'm not sure.
You've got a lot more to give fucks about now.
Yeah, I have. You know, like, I actually love being at home with my kid, and I love being around, and that world that I lived in, I wasn't. And I actually made a decision. That's why I moved to Cornwall. I made a decision to be with my kid, and I can't do that doing the other thing. You know, editorially speaking, I used to fly all over the place, and I'd do it for a few hundred quid, and I'd spend, you know, a good 50% of that on booze and food. It's not sustainable really for in the long term. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But it's really cool. I actually love mentoring, and when we get young photographers coming through Fanatic, and I see that energy and that buzz and that excitement, and they walk out into those fields and they're looking for those opportunities. I love seeing that, and I love like going through their edits and critiquing and developing those skills. It's something I actually really enjoy.
Yeah, cool.
But you know, I actually saw that coming, and I could feel that energy was shifting in me from being wanting to walk around with a camera and photograph that stuff to actually the more like taking more of a back seat and actually what do I want to photograph. And in 2016 I went off and did like my first ever big long-term personal project, and that was a huge step forward for me in understanding who I was as a photographer. Because I suppose, you know, a lot of people, like even, you know, like one of my best mates, Andrew Whitten, who started Fanatic with me back in the day, you know, he had a classical photography education because when he was a kid, that's what he wanted. You know, when I was a kid, I wanted to be an Iron Maiden. You know, meanwhile, Andrew was like, you know, shooting at school, doing an A-level, doing a degree, going and assisting. And by the time we met, and we met at the NME, I'd been photographing, you know, for a paycheck for about 6 months, and he'd been wanting to do it his entire life and been working at it for a long time. And we came at it from such wildly different angles. I forgot what my point is. What the hell are we talking
about? Taking more of a back seat.
Oh yeah. So that's what it is. Yeah. So like, I was a proper rookie when I met Andrew, and like it took me 10 years to figure out that I was a photographer. Like, because I was just rolling from awesome thing to awesome thing and loving life and like having a really great time. And I never really stopped to consider I am now a professional photographer. Like, obviously I knew I was, but like on a philosophical sense, like it wasn't ever anything that was on my radar. So it was never something that I sat back and was like, these are my goals. This is what I want to achieve. It was just something I was enjoying. But by the time I realized that I was, like 2016, I'd been a photographer for about 10 years in a paid sense. And I was like, oh shit, you know what? I feel more of a photographer now than I ever did a musician. And that was a huge mental shift for me. And I was like, well, what do I want to say as a photographer? Because the last 10 years have been taken up by me photographing for a paycheck. I never once committed to making work for myself. And
also, shooting live bands, like it's never about the photographer. It's totally about who's in front of the camera.
Absolutely, yeah. In the I think, yeah, it is. And there's so much serendipity with music photography as well. You're right. It's not really like about your voice. I mean, as a photographer, it's about your voice, technically speaking. Like technically,
yeah, sure. There's a style, like a certain lens choice.
Yeah,
or
exactly. But that's
people are only looking at the picture because it's fucking Iron Maiden.
Yeah, the majority, the vast 99.9% of people are doing that. Absolutely. So I all of a sudden was kind of felt this self-awakening. I was like, I have a desire to go and create. And
so yeah, what was that? What was that personal project?
Well, I'd been on holiday in Scotland and I'd met this skipper of this boat, and he was telling me about the various little small isles on the Inner Hebrides, and one of them stood out to me when he started talking about this Isle of Egg. And I went home from that holiday in 2015 in autumn, and I just sat on this. I don't know what it was. It just kept chipping away at my head, like, what is it about this place that fascinates me? And then one day I thought, you know what, I'm going to go find out. And I started planning, what can I do? And I didn't want to just go on holiday and take a few photographs of lobster pots. Like I was like, what? I spent some time asking myself, what it was that I was feeling like. How could I photograph that? What is it that I want to say? And I guess I don't know. Like through music had always been a way that I found community in my life. I grew up in quite a rough place, and there was always like we were even in many fights and literally beaten unconscious just because we were in a band, and that sense of looking for community through music and my bandmates, it did feel like us against the world, because that's how it was at times.
Yeah.
And I lost that, and I was looking for that through photography, and that's why it's one of the reasons why Fanatic started. As I always explained, like I didn't want to be constantly the lone gun, as it were. And now I was like, okay, beyond photography, what can I say with my photography? And I'd heard about this community in it.
Well, and like you were saying as well, how have I grown and how have I changed?
And I'd heard about this community on the Isle of Egg, who were the first ever group of community to buy their land off a rogue laird. And not only that they were also the first place in the world to run exclusively off 3 renewable sources of energy, and they did this entirely, by themselves. And that fascinated me, and I was like, that community must be so tight, and it must be so interesting, and all these things just started whirring around in my head, and I started to build the idea of doing a long form study of all the people that live there.
Mm.
So I got in touch with I did a bit of research, found out they had a trust, and I got in touch with the chair of the trust, Maggie Fife, and I spoke to her a few times, and we hatched a proposal, and because she wanted to put it to the island. They get a lot of people visit them. I didn't realize this at the time. I actually thought naively I was the intrepid explorer going off to beyond the wall.
And this was before you'd even been there.
Yeah. This was before I'd been there. Yeah. But I did. So she basically said, I want to talk to the island as a whole, because I didn't want to turn up I'm quite a socialist, and I hate the idea of taking and not giving. And for me, there has to be a balance in that, and I could not just go and photograph, and because I felt like if I was going to step into this community, it would be small and it would be tight, and all those things that it was. And how would I achieve the best possible work that was reflective of who I am and of the people that I was photographing? The only way to do that was to be upfront and to try and make it an opportunity where people knew that I was coming and that people were expecting me and that people wanted me there. And because I was holding a mirror up to their community. And I mean, you don't live on the Isle of Egg in the middle of, you the Inner Hebrides in this tiny little island if you want to be in the limelight,
No.
So I realised that, and anyway, Maggie went off, and they had a big, they had a meeting about it, and most of the islanders came together and voted, and they were like, yeah, okay, let's see how it goes, let's bring him on. So that was basically give me the green light, and a few months later I set off and I started a year-long project where I visited the island in summer, winter, spring, and then back in summer again. And the work I created over that year was kept entirely secret. Like nobody, it wasn't on Instagram, and it wasn't like obviously my wife and my agent and a couple of friends saw it, but nobody else saw it. No one on the island saw it. And then a year after I started the project, I did an exhibition on the island, and it was exclusively for them. So like before I took it out into the world and went, here, there's that, like, here's my ego. Look at this. I great. Look at these photographs I made. Before, because of course you want to do that. That's why you make work. But before I did that, I wanted to hand that gift to the community that allowed it in the first place.
Yeah.
And so we set up an exhibition in the town hall, and it was just probably the greatest night of my entire life, to be honest with you. Like, I one of them. People came and people could take the prints at the end of the night. So it was such a fleeting moment of, here's something I've spent a year making, and everybody came down. Like, I had people telling me that this had reminded them why they lived there, and like there were tears of joy and laughter, and I don't think that I'd been prepared, if I'm honest with you, for what it was I was going to experience in all this. And I didn't realise that photography could be that powerful and that moving, because I'd like in the world I'd grown up in, photography wasn't that powerful, that moving. I mean, certainly photography got me, got me into bands when I was 14 and whatnot. But
yeah,
to bring about such emotion and such connection,
definitely contrast to the working for NME, where it's get the shot, go to press, next thing.
I mean, working for the NME where some security tries to headbutt you, or you're running down your street because some muggers are trying to eat your camera bag in Camden at 4 a.m. Like, yeah, it's a stark contrast to that. And it was beautiful, and it was one of the most, like I say, one of the most rewarding things I've ever experienced. And that project went on to that year to have 2 photographs featured in the Taylor Weston Portrait Prize, which was, again, like a significant moment for me in my career, for a number of reasons. I'd entered that competition maybe 6 times prior to that and never got through. So it was quite significant for me for that, but also it gave me a real understanding that competitions don't mean shit.
Yeah.
So whilst I was like reveling in all this glory, I all of a sudden I started to realize what was it that I was hoping to get out of achieving that, because it I think it reminded me that the most important thing of all of that work was what those smiles and those tears and the friendships that I'd built through its creation, and none of the accolades that followed.
Sure. Going back to the start of that project, after they'd had their community meeting and decided that, yeah, this sounds like something that, we want to let someone come on and make, was that kind of almost more pressure once you arrived? because there'd been this build up to it,
Yeah.
how did you go about kind of actually breaking into the community?
That's an interesting question because there was a lot more pressure because of it, but also it was like I'd never really done any planning before for a photography project, so I didn't really understand what to do. As daft as that might sound, like once I got the green light, I booked my accommodation, I drove up there, and you're not allowed to take a car on the island unless you live there or you have a permit. So I got a permit, and I arranged all that stuff, and I got off the ferry and went to my little B&B, which was on the far side of the island. And a few things happened that day. That day, the United Kingdom voted to leave Europe. And I got on a ferry to a small island with no TV, no radio, no internet, no phone signal in my B&B, and I felt remarkably cut off. Like, obviously, I was obviously a Remainer. I say obviously. I think almost every photographer I've ever met is a Remainer. So there was this sense of like being cut off from Europe, and I actually was devastated, and I'm sure you were. It was utterly devastating.
I mean, that day, I think. I mean, it's like what 4 years ago now.
Yeah,
yeah. It was like an earthquake had struck.
Yeah, absolutely, and I had no one to share that with, who I knew and loved, who I could talk and grieve with. So I went. I remember sat in my B&B, which was tiny little house on the far side of the island, like I say, where there's no phone signal or out like that, and I had no connection to the outside world, and I was kind of like in at that point just incredibly isolated and lonely, and I didn't even consider once I got to the island what would I do, and until I got there, and then couple that with what had happened that day, it was just like, wow, like I actually have no idea what I'm going to do now. I don't feel myself. I feel quite lost, and I've got no one to talk to, and I don't know where I am. It was mental. So I sat there for a few hours, like looking out the window, going, being honest to God, being scared. I was so nervous, so bloody nervous. And I thought, well, do you know what? I'll go talk to Maggie, who I'd spoke to on email. And I went and found where she lived, and I went and spoke to her, and I was telling her how I felt. And she said, look, just there's one pub on the island, and it's not really a pub, it's a cafe, and it's called Tea Rooms. And it was a really sunny day, and she was like, get yourself down Tea Room. Everybody who likes to socialise will be there because it's a Friday, and it's 3 p.m, and it's sunny as hell. So just get yourself down there. So I was like, yeah, you know what, I will, I'll go down. And she walked me to my car, and she was called Maggie Fife, and she goes, oh, and look out for, she goes, on the island people call me Big Maggie, and that's because there's a little Maggie. Okay. So you look out for her, she'll welcome you to the island. I was like, oh, okay. So anyway, I set off down to the tea room, and she was right, like there were maybe 30 or 40 people all outside. And you knew there weren't tourists.
How many people live on the island in total?
At that time, there was about 95.
Okay. So a third of the population.
Yeah. And so and you knew there weren't tourists, because they do get a lot of tourists there, but you knew these guys weren't tourists because everybody had like wellies on, and nobody was wearing North Face, you know what I mean? And I was like, right, okay, she's right, everybody's here, they're all sat on picnic tables, all drinking, it was quite merry and whatnot. I was like, okay, fucking hell, right, how do I do this? So I went into the cafe and I got a drink, and I stood at the queuing for a drink, and there was a tap on my shoulder, and I looked across, and I was like, oh, there's a little lass stood there, and she was like, do you want a sweet? And I could see on the packet it was like extreme sour gobstoppers or something, and I could tell she was being mischievous. So I was like, yeah, sure, I'll have a sweet. So I took one, and I was like pretending and playing up, going, oh my God, what are these? And she was like belly laughing on the floor. And I said to her, I just had this thought. I was like, you're not little Maggie by any chance, are you? And she's like, yeah, who told you? And I was like, oh, okay. I was like, Big Maggie, because actually what Big Maggie had said was, look out for little Maggie, she's a force of nature.
Right.
And when that happened, I was like, that has to be little Maggie, because she's such a like reveling in this like pain that I was in with this sweet.
Yeah, as if on cue, here comes little Maggie.
Yeah, do you know? And it felt like a movie. It genuinely did. Like every aspect about being there for that entire. Because I was on this tiny little fucking island for 2 weeks, and I did that on purpose because I wanted to make sure that I got to know everybody, and I didn't know how that was going to work out. And this was my first experience, and it genuinely felt like a scene out of a film. So I was like, that shit just doesn't happen. That's wild. So anyway, I thought that gave me like this boost of confidence. I was like, right, okay. So I got my can of beer and I went outside, and there was like 6, 7 picnic tables, all rammed, all people just chatting and blah, blah, blah. I thought, why not kill all these birds with one stone? So I was like, excuse me, everybody. My name is Danny. I'm a photographer. Maggie Fife told me she'd been in contact with you all about me coming and doing this project. So I just thought, whilst I have this opportunity, I'll say hello to everybody. And yeah, come and have a word if you want. And I finished expecting, welcome! It was like crickets.
Oh, man.
Like tumbleweed. It's like the slaughtered lamb off American Werewolf in London.
Yeah.
Like a couple of giggles. And then all of a sudden, everybody just turned back to what they were doing before, burst out laughing. And I was stood there with a fucking can of beer going, oh my God, have I just shot myself in the foot? And then there's this one fella who was looking at me like he might look at a wounded puppy in an adoption centre. Like, oh, you poor bastard.
Oh, man.
You daft, stupid, poor bastard. And he had that like sorrowful look in his eyes. And he beckoned me over, so I was like, "Oh, thank God for that!" So I went over to him, and we started chatting. And it turned out to be wee Maggie's dad, and he took me under his wing, and that was actually like a very rewarding friendship. To be honest with you, like I love him to bits, and I'll never forget how his empathy for my situation was part of my journey on that island. To be honest with you, that opened the door. That day, I arrived at the tea room at 3 p.m, and I left at 3 a.m. And by the time I'd left, I'd been bought drinks by and bought drinks for probably everybody that had been around those tables initially, and I didn't pick my camera up for another 4 days. I decided that I would just get to know everybody first, as much as I could, and in varying aspects of the community, not just in the pub, but like I know that there was this guy there who's doing like wild foraging, and I realised that maybe there's a demographic of the island who are more likely to go wild foraging than drink whiskey till 3 a.m. So I went and hung out with those guys, and I went initially just to explain my intentions as I went along. And then by the time I felt people trusted me, that's when I started getting my camera out, and that took about 4 or 5 days.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking, like, there surely is no easy way to break into that. You could have gone quietly up to every table and said, "Oh, hey guys, what are you talking about?" They like, it almost seems like that's a pretty good way to go about it. Just like, right, all at once, let's break the ice.
I mean, I felt so small, and I think back about it, and I do laugh about it. But I guess so. I mean, but it was one of those things where you can feel the idea forming, and you have no idea how it got from the idea forming to out of your mouth in under a second.
Yeah.
And you're like, what am I doing? Oh my God, I'm actually doing this. Fucking hell, oh my God. And then before you know it, like you're out of the frying pan and in the fire. Yeah, I don't know. I guess my gut reaction made me do that. And yeah, like I say, I'm in hindsight absolutely glad that I did. It was a hell of a fun day, to be honest with you, because of that, people just maybe thought, what an absolute tool. So I think, whilst I was there were in that first 2 weeks, there was probably another 4 photographers that came and a TV crew, and it was relentless. And because a lot of those photographers are academic, because of this first place in the world to live off exclusively of 3 renewable sources of energy, like they are subject to a lot of academic like reviews and whatnot. People want to learn from them and want to, like, PhD students or even just regular, School of Art students know about it, and they'll from Glasgow and they'll come up and and it's relentless. They get so many people visiting them and wanting to talk about it. But most of those people skulk around the fringes of the community, and they come for 3 days and then they disappear. Me going there and presenting myself in such a manner and telling them that I was there for 2 weeks and I wasn't going anywhere.
Yeah,
and actually, I don't even have a camera on me. Let's just have a beer and a chat and get to know each other. The doors of that community were flung open, and that first night I had one angry encounter. And I don't like to say how it is. On an individual level, I like to keep my conversations and what I experience on an individual level private, because I don't think that it's fair to share those things. But one angry person cornered me and vehemently told me not to take the piss out of them and not to embarrass them and not to be an arsehole, essentially.
Okay.
And it was, like I was told in no uncircumcised, terms like "don't fuck us over." And then on the second to last day that I was there on that particular occasion, that same person put their arm around me and told me that I was one of them, and that I was an islander, and even now I get a rush of endorphins thinking about that. I could feel that surge through me now, because I'd gone there wanting, I hate to say it, it sounds like such a cute cliche, but like I was looking for meaning in my own life.
Some sort of belonging, I guess,
Yeah, absolutely. Like at that time, I was going through divorce. I had, discovered that I was a photographer all of a sudden. And, I don't know, there was a lot of transitions in my life, and I wanted somewhere to feel like I had like a home. I'd moved to London and I wasn't enjoying it, and I did feel quite isolated, and it was remarkable. I felt like I found home. It was it was very powerful.
Yeah. And so that was the course of a year, you say?
Yeah. I went back in winter, and then like back in spring, and then back in summer. And I didn't want to. I learned a lot of things from that, actually. I learned that familiarity over time does not build good work. Like every almost, I'd say 95% of the work that I created over those periods was the best work was in those first 2 weeks.
Okay.
And on my subsequent visits, if I'd not gone, you wouldn't have noticed the quality overall. It was quite interesting, and I think.
What do you think? What do you think that was? Do you think it was as you kind of like started to have more of an idea of what it was you were shooting, or like you started to kind of gravitate towards certain things, or?
I don't know. It's hard to put my finger on, because I think that I don't know if you've ever read the book How to Be a Photographer with David Earn.
I haven't, no.
The Magnum Photographer. You can get it online for free as a PDF. It's absolutely fascinating. Bill Hearn, who's a Magnum photographer, and David Hearn, and Bill Jay, and the whole book is a conversation, and it's literally that. It is literally a conversation, and it's like how to become a photographer. Like what are the parameters of what make a photographer? And part of the one of the things I talk about a lot is define like what's the definition of what a good personal project should be. Not like in subject matter, but actually like location, availability, like how well do you know your subject, and these things. It's absolutely fascinating read, and they discuss like availability is so important to personal work, that you're able to chip away, you're able to develop it, and you can revisit it and revisit it and revisit it. They're talking like not a year, even like 5 years, 10 years, like develop that story. And I get that, and I think that if discovery isn't part of that, if study is part of that, then I think that works. But when you're, for me, I was doing this almost like a photographic census, which is quite a crude way of describing it, but it is kind of like that of the island. Now it exists as an archive in their history records. So it really was, in some senses, that. But for me, I was looking for that sense of discovery and like that, maybe even the awkwardness between not knowing people and me and discovering like who these personalities are and all this. I don't know. That had an energy that by the time I'd gone back the second time and I knew everybody and everybody was familiar and I was like, come over for dinner and here, have a drink. And like, it felt more like a holiday and a social than it did a photography project. And that's not to say I wasn't photographing. I certainly was, but it just didn't have the same energy as the first time I went.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I was chatting to, funnily enough, another music photographer a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying how no matter what it is you're shooting, view it as work. Like view it as work, and otherwise it's got no destination if you don't kind of see it as I'm doing work. And I'm just thinking, like standing up and kind of announcing your arrival at the beginning. It's kind of right. I'm the outsider. And I'm here to do I'm here to do a project, and I think there's almost maybe in what you're saying some hindsight to that as like, it was probably a good thing you did that.
Yeah, there's intention, right? So there's intention in your actions, and it's defined. It has purpose. There's momentum, and I think all those things create an energy. It's interesting because like. What you just said about treat it as work. I think that I agree with it and disagree with that as a statement, because I think that if photography is in your blood, then everything that you do, when I photograph my daughter, I photograph her with the inseparable eye that I have, and when I shoot band portraits of whoever, like. There is no difference to my thought process, to my composition, to my wanting to get the moment, to my wanting to achieve a predefined notion of what I think is a good photograph in this instance.
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't change with my daughter or my fucking dog. Like, so I get that idea of treat it as work, because I think that in itself should be, inseparable from you as a photographer. But then at the same time, the idea of treating it as work to me doesn't sound like you allow yourself room to discover and to develop and to I suppose maybe what how you could interpret that is that you should everything that you photograph, don't drop the ball, even if you're having fun with it. Like, always try and be on top of what it is that you're doing, and I get that totally. But the like I said, by the second, third time I've gone there, I knew everybody, and the energies had changed, and I guess it was just a different thing, and the photographs became tamer. Less bold.
It's interesting. When you began to bring all the project together, did you find yourself collecting the images from the first trip? Were the later trips kind of less significant to the final project?
Very much so. I mean, there was. I feel like the project had several audiences, and the photographs were brought together in separate, like groups for those audiences. So for the island, my ego about what defined a good photograph went out the window, and actually what I did was, like, whether or not I thought, person X was just nothing more than, say, a snapshot versus something else which I found much more profound. Everything was included, and because when the most important thing for me for that exhibition was that when people came and only, to my knowledge, there was only about maybe 2 or 3, 4 people that didn't come to the exhibition on the island, and those people weren't in any of the pictures.
Okay.
And so everybody that came had a photograph of themselves, and that so I was able to remove my ego from that exhibition and say, regardless of what I feel, here are those photographs. But then for my own website, I wanted to develop a different narrative to that. I wanted to create a selection of photographs that reflects the energy that I felt when I first went there.
Mm.
So there's it's a fraction of the project, and maybe when you look at it, I do often think, Christ, am I being harsh? I printed a book somewhere, so I had a collection of all of the photographs accessible, and that's what the island has as well. And when I look at that, I think that actually maybe it's just interesting because I did it, and I look back and I have memories attached to it. So for my website, it's like it's such a slim selection.
Sure.
But that's a
yeah. Sorry, finish your thought.
Well, I was just saying that's I think self-editing and being able to tell a story narratively just through images is the most important thing on a website. Not because no one has got that much interest in your work as much as you.
Yeah.
So you have to control that.
Yeah. And did that project coincide with your gravitation towards shooting on film as well?
Yes. Yeah, I think it. So I actually started shooting on film quite a long time ago. I say quite a long time ago. I mean, relatively speaking, in my career.
Mm.
And I think in 2009 I got a commission to shoot an album cover for an XL recording artist. And basically they said to me, "Oh, we want it to be on film. Like, is that something that you shoot?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course it is. Yeah, absolutely." And I'd never owned a film camera. Well, I did, but when I was younger,
Yeah.
Like, so I was like, "Okay, fuck, I have to go out and buy one and figure this whole thing out." So I did, and it was, it wasn't an entirely a disaster, but I knew so little, and I actually think that in film photography, there's not that much to know, but if you don't know it, you're gonna fuck up. Like, and I didn't know it, and I did. Like, everything was underexposed, and I remember when I say everything, I think like the vast majority of what I shot was underexposed, and it was a bit of a disaster. I also
did you get what you needed out of it for that shoot?
Yeah. In a nutshell, yeah, I did. I ended up, I got some really cool Polaroids of this landscape that was shot as B-roll whilst we were out there doing other photographs, and that ended up being the album cover, and it looked awesome, and it was lovely. So yeah, I did, but it learnt me a lot, and actually it scared the shit out of me. So that was 2009, and I put it away. I was like, you know what? I don't like this film shit. I don't understand it. And then in 2014, I was doing a Kaiser Chiefs shoot. Well, actually, I'd done a Kaiser Chiefs shoot in 2013 on film, and I'd experienced the same situation as I had all those years ago, and that everything was underexposed, and I was so frustrated with it that I ended up buying. There's a photographer who does like film workshops, and he was like one of the big shots, like Zacharias and all that back in that period. It's called Jonathan Canales, I think his name is.
Okay.
And he had like a film book, like, and he shoots weddings on film. And I always thought, well, if anyone's going to know about film and getting it right, it's somebody who shoots fucking weddings on film.
Yeah.
So I bought his ebook, and I was like, what am I doing wrong? And actually, I learned everything in one paragraph that I'd been doing wrong. And I was like, holy shit. Like, I despite spending hundreds of pounds on messing up, it never dawned on me like to treat film in the opposite way to what I was doing. I was like underexposing, and instead I learned that actually you can overexpose portrait until cows come home, and it barely makes a difference. But if you underexpose it, you are fucked. And that's, in a nutshell, that's what I learned. And I was like, right, okay, so all of a sudden, my exposures were great, and I in 2014 I got asked to do this shoot with the Kaisers again, and I thought, you know what, I'll do something big different. They wanted digital, but I hired a Signar P2.
Oh,
I was like, let's do some large format, and I one of the photographs I got out of that I absolutely adore.
Yeah.
That was the moment where I stepped over the line and went, I'm going to shoot film so much more. So I got out the old RZ, which I'd had in a cupboard for 5 years. I was like, right, okay, here we go. And then by 2016, when I did As I Found It, I shot As I Found It. Well, As I Found It is the project's title for the album project that I did. Yeah. When I shot As I Found It, I shot it entirely on film, and not without its problems. Certainly, part of that journey, I learned significantly some errors that I'd made and whatnot. But by that point, I was shooting commercial work on film, and like I'd embraced it in every aspect of what I did. I've now kind of swung like back into somewhere in the middle, because I was so film like, I had a Deodorf 10.8, I have a Master Technica 5.4, 2 RZs, 5 EOS 1Ns, an FM. I could go on, and literally I could go on and on and on. I became like that guy.
Yeah.
And then
hashtag film is not dead.
Oh mate, I hashtagged that to shit. I had all them hashtags. Yeah. Film is not dead. Like keep film alive. Shoot film, stay broke. All those hashtags. I embraced it. And there came a point on my journey. Actually, the Deodorf taught me a lot of what I don't like about shooting film. And I think part of that was actually attaching some sort of ownership to shooting film. Made me somehow better, and that is entirely bullshit, of course.
Well, maybe it goes along with this idea that it's more authentic. This makes me more authentic as a photographer.
Absolutely. And actually, that seed came back from when I did the XL shoot in 2009, because what I learned back then was that record labels, like the guys that they want to hire, all shoot on film. I'm trying to remember names now who I researched. Fucking hell, it's a long time ago, but. Who was that? There was a photographer who did a magazine called Loose Lips.
Oh, that's who I was chatting to recently, Steve Gullick.
Steve Gullick, exactly. Right.
Yeah. So that was who was saying that view everything as work.
Yeah. So like that's who I was looking at, going, oh shit, Steve Gullick was doing portraits of everybody. So he shoots on film, and then of course you have people like Corbin and whatnot. Anton Corbin, not Jeremy, who are shooting on film, and you're like, right, okay. That's what I have to do, that to be taken as serious as an artist. So that, all those years later when I was hashtagging my photographs to fuck, like that's me telling the world I shoot on film. And don't you confuse that. Don't you confuse that this is a digital photograph, hashtag RZ67. Which I did actually figure that out on my own terms at some point. I was like, I asked myself, I was like, why am I hashtagging RZ67? Like what am I saying? That this photograph's not good enough to exist in the world without letting everybody know where I shot it on. Is that true? Is it true?
Well, to be honest, I think there is. I think you're touching on something there. I mean, I do it the other way around. I'm like digital medium format. It's not fucking film. It's fucking digital.
Yeah. But what I asked myself then was like, if I think that this photograph's only good enough if everybody knows it's on film, then I'm not producing work that's good enough. So I stopped hashtagging my photographs with, obviously you can do that to get your work out to a wider audience. But in terms of like, film is not dead, RZ67, Mamiya this, Mamiya that, like 35mm, like whatever.
Yeah.
It actually doesn't matter. And what really hit that hammer home was when I after As I Found Her finished, and I wanted something else to work on, and coming from a working class background, I only had 4 GCSEs and I cheated on one of them, so technically only 3 GCSEs. I thought, you know what, I'm going to educate myself. First person in my family to go to university, and I was 42 when I did that.
Awesome.
And whilst I was there, it was online. I did a master's. I went from in reality 3 GCSE to a master's, and I'm really proud of that. And I paid for it through my own hard work and photography. But what I realised whilst I was there was the film photography snobbery is actually also an academic problem. And that, it's kind of, I said this recently on Twitter because I saw somebody did a really great video meme about film photography, and I was like, oh, the canonization of photography is absolutely has its roots in academia, because I was in a class with a teacher who's a PhD doctor who was telling the class just anecdotally that film photography is just better, and that it's more masterful. And I was sat there going, I don't think that in that particular room there was anybody with as much experience on film as what I had, because I was obsessed by it, and I'd shot every format over those years, under commercial situations within that small group of people. I'm not saying I know my shit worldwide, no. But I'm saying I was just reflecting. I was like, right, okay, I think this validates me to have an opinion, And I tried to have this discussion with the teacher, and I was just shut down. Like, if you don't think film's the best, you don't really know, do you? Yeah. I was like, what?
I've always just thought, it's just like, how far do you want to go back? You know what I mean? Like, surely you should be doing like etchings or something. If it's all about authenticity, then get your paintbrush out.
But also, once you understand, once you lose your fear of exposing Porsche 400 correctly, what you realise is, on a day like today where it's beautifully sunny, right?
Well, I was just about to say it's just started shouting it down with rain here, so clearly there's a difference.
I can walk outside there, and I can expose all day long without a light meter, and I can pop off shots, and I know that every shot's going to be exposed beautifully. I don't even need to take a light meter out if I'm shooting film, because once you know, how it works, it's fine. I actually think that to make something digital look good takes far more skill than making something look good on film, because you can look, I saw there's a new Instagram account popped up on my phone. I was like, oh, my gut reaction was, this is really pretty, and I was looking at it, and it was 35 mil, and it was end of roll stuff, where you get that orange white tear and things like that, and I was like, it is just the artifacts, and it's not accomplished photography I'm looking at, and that's okay as well. By the way, that's okay as well. We are only talking about whether or not, the pseudo intelligent.
Well, yeah. Does it have more meaning because it's on a piece of film?
No. So right now, I'm back at. I hadn't actually shot. Last bit of film I shot was for a commercial job, which was back in November. But actually, last year I got a Fuji GFX 50, and I love it. And actually, do you know what? I was even snobby about sensor size until recently. I had to do a gig where I ended up using for video. I ended up using a Fuji X-T3, which I'm sure most of your listeners will know. That's an APC size sensor, and I had been nothing but full frame and medium format, since the D3 came out. And all of a sudden I was shooting on this X-T3 going, these photographs look fucking incredible. Absolutely incredible. I've been such a snob, even digitally. I don't know if snob's the right word. Maybe just I'm misled.
No, I think it's easy to kind of get tribal about it. Again, I've kind of I don't know why, but yeah, I've always been a digital kid, and I think just because the film crowd were getting all protective about theirs, it was just oh, well, you know what, fuck film, digital's the way to go. And I don't know, I think it's easy to get kind of tribal about it.
Yeah, it can, but I get so frustrated at and this is coming from somebody who still has a massive passion for film photography. I absolutely adore it, and I still have the vast majority of cameras that I've picked up over the years, and I still use them. I never own anything. If it sits on shelf, I'm not sentimental. It goes on eBay. If I'm using it, then fine. I don't have the luxury and financial stability to be able to have an archive of cameras that I don't use. But what really I can show you how shit film photography is. I can actually show you examples of like the Emperor's New Clothes. And I think large format photography for me was like a nail in the coffin. That like I was just like, oh my god, I can't put up with the Emperor's New Clothes anymore. So I was looking at up at rising stars of photography using large format, and I was like, everything that I've seen, like, and actually, you know, I bought into Emperor's New Clothes. I went and got a fucking Deardorff, a 1937 Deardorff, and you know, like, I was like that person who thought, well, you know, I've got to keep going to bigger and bigger because that's the way I've been heading over these years.
Yeah.
Everything that I photographed was dull as ditch water. Like I think over the course of 12 months of using the Deardorff and actually using it extensively, like I was using it a lot for the MA that I was studying. I just produced endlessly boring work, unimaginative portraits, and then all of a sudden I stood back and looked at the people who were my peers in large format photography, and I'm looking around at those guys and we're like, oh my god, everybody's producing boring work. Like none of this is imaginative or interesting or even remotely like fun.
Well, it's like the object.
I'm probably going to get shot down.
Well, no, I think you're right. You know, it's like letting the object get in the way of the craft.
Well, okay, you know, I'm talking about me, and that is exactly what happened. It took me a year to realise, and actually, you know, we got invited to do film photography for one of our festival clients, the Wilderness Festival, and we've done it twice for those guys now. And on the first year, I had the Deardorff and I took it with me, and I said I'd shoot 5 frames because you know shit's so expensive. And it was a disaster, like light leaks, and you know, I'd spend like an hour setting up a photograph, and out of desperation of not, and I was being too picky because of the process and because of the cost. I was like, oh well, you know, I'll choose the right moment, and then the right moment never came, and then ended up forcing the moment.
Yeah.
You know, like it's just, oh my god, talk about putting an object before creativity. You know, like it was exactly that, and nothing. That for me was like the end of it. I'd gone, wow, I have to, and I wrote a massive like assignment piece, like 3,000 or 4,000 words, kind of dissecting what it was that I felt about it. And yeah, I realized actually I want to be a master of this medium, but the truth is it's just not, you know, working for me because the camera is mastering me. And like it defines what I shoot and how I shoot. And I started looking at other people, and I think it's very rare that you can find a large format photographer where the apparatus does not define what they shoot. Now there are people, because Alex Stowe, for example, like, you know, he was one of my massive inspirations for wanting to get my hands on that camera, and I adore his work. But I think he's a magician because, like, you know, and I watched that. Have you seen that Alex Stowe documentary?
There's a couple. I've watched.
There's one available to like buy off his website or something.
Right, I don't know if I've watched anything longer than a couple of little interviews.
It's fascinating. I'll try to find the name of it, what it's called.
But I agree, he is brilliant.
Somewhere to Disappear.
Okay, I'll check it out.
Like I've watched that about 5 times because I couldn't. I felt like I was watching David Blaine. Because I was like, okay, the apparatus means nothing to him. Like, he uses it because obviously it's, you know, aesthetically what he was achieving is what I wanted to achieve. Like, it's a negative that is beautiful.
Yeah.
But for him, the apparatus just existed, and I could not make it just exist. I wrestled with it, you know. And I feel like I see that. In a lot of people's work, that whether or not they're willing to accept it, because it took me a lot of own truths to be like, no, put it down, move on, because your work has got absolutely got more boring since you picked this camera up.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think in the example of Alex, it's like his projects are so contemplative that it absolutely makes sense to work on the slowest format possible.
Yeah, yeah. And when you watch that Somewhere to Disappear, and I think what you're seeing there is that, like, when I went and did As I Found Her, and I didn't pick up a camera for 4 days, he's able to experience all those things that I put into 4 days into like his interactions, but still take photographs and do it on a large format camera. And I think that's what makes him quite a special photographer, actually.
Yeah. That's that is. I think there's definitely something in that. Okay, so to kind of take it in some way full circle, I want to hear about your metal project that you're working on.
Oh, right, okay, yeah. I mean, was working on, because the world has changed somewhat recently.
We're on a bit of a hiatus, but yeah, what's the idea behind that, and where do you want to take it?
Well, okay. As we discussed previously about community and whatnot,
this is coming from a question coming from a lifelong metalhead, hence the interest.
Right. Okay. Well, same here, bud. Same here. I grew up with a bone disease, and by the time I was 29, I'd had like 25 or so operations, including a complete knee replacement operation. And which I obviously still have. And through that period of my life, it was like, I am a lot better now, but that point in my life, actually, I was registered as disabled, and I was living in arthritic pain 24 hours a day. I woke up in pain, I went to bed in pain, and I didn't have a manageable way to deal with that, because the only choice I actually had reached was opiates. So I was living in constant pain, and it was a really difficult time in my life. And reflecting on that, what empowered me and what got me through and what made me want to get up every day was music and heavy metal. And like I found that music empowered me. And I think that after I did As I Found Her, and during the course of my MA, I was asking myself, developing ideas about communities. And it was actually my wife that pointed out to me, because she's also a photographer, because we worked at Download Festival quite a lot with Fanatic, and she suggested to me, she was like, have you ever thought about looking a bit closer to home for your community? And it never dawned on me, actually. Like, I'm quite guilty of like not seeing wood for trees, and as soon as Jenna had said that to me, I looked around and I was like, oh my God, like, of course, like, this makes perfect sense.
I had my community all along.
Yeah, I mean, like, it leapt out at me. I was like, holy shit, like, I'd love to do a document of like, the idea at the moment is still developing, really, because like it developed and changed over the course of doing it. But the idea was to create a document of community of heavy metal fans at Download Festival, but through the eyes of disability. And that's because like, growing up with a disability, like, I found, like, as I explained, that music was a safe harbor for me. It empowered me. And I think that's a really powerful story to tell. And actually being able to tell that story of, because, and I'm going there and talking to people about their experiences as a metal fan, like, some of them were just as perfectly normal as me and you. Like, there's some people didn't want their disability to be a part of their narrative, but for other people, it is, because actually, like me, when I was in pain all the fucking time, metal literally saved my life. It stopped me. I don't know. So I just wanted to figure that voice out and whatnot. So I went to Download with the blessing of Andy Coppin and the Download team. I went there and started working on a project, and I wanted it to be like as much like a collaboration, but of words and photography. It had to be like their voice and my pictures, like what. And so I did that. But what I initially wanted was actually, so the project, like I said, it's developing and it's really not that well defined because it kind of fell in on me. Because what I imagined was I'd take the photographs at the festival, but then to make the project more individualistic rather than a generic festival background, I would visit each person that I photographed at the festival at home, and we would have the juxtaposition of the festival person and the home life. And I photographed like 15 people at Download that weekend. That doesn't sound like a lot, but every single person I was with for 2 to 3 hours, like without exaggeration, because like you go up to somebody and you go, right, okay, you've got a disability, can I photograph you? Like what, that is a very fucking hard conversation to have.
Sure.
So like I have to go in there and be like, this is why I'm doing it. I grew up with this disability. This is how metal defined who I am as a person and actually saved my life, because I was, when you're in that much pain, I was very depressed, and like it was genuinely a really important aspect of my life, and I had to explain that to everybody, and I didn't take, and then like I did on Egg, I didn't want to just be gone. Like, oh, thanks for letting me exploit your image. Now I'm off. It was actually every chat was.
Well, yeah, it's as much about your story as it is theirs. Yeah.
Well, only so that they understood that I'm not objectifying them. Like that was because I think I think about that quite a lot within personal work, photography projects. Is that there's a lot of objectification of different aspects of lesser seen aspects of our lives, And I didn't want to be doing that. So to get that across, there's a lot of preamble and discussion, and explaining what am I doing with the project, why am I doing the project, what's going to happen with the project, what would I like to achieve, and then that discussion is what can we achieve in this situation. It was really a hard slog. So I shot 15 people, and almost everybody dropped out of the second part of the shoot.
Right.
And I found that so incredibly disheartening, including like driving up from London to Barnsley to meet this guy who seemed mega keen in emails and on the phone, and like and when I met him in real life at the Download, and then got to his house and he wouldn't answer his door.
Oh man!
And I could hear I was ringing his phone, and I could hear his phone pinging inside, and I was like, okay, so you're there. So in the end, I wasn't angry or anything. I was just like sad that we never got to make the work, because nobody knows what it's like to live with a disability unless you're that person. And I what I learned from that was clearly, like in the festival world, like everybody, you're happy and you're open to opportunities and you're having a laugh and you've probably even had a few drinks and you're willing to go along with things that you might not do at home. And clearly that invasion of privacy that the next part of the project was just didn't come off, and I ended up photographing of all those people and being stood up. I actually ended up photographing 2.
Okay.
And there weren't, and what I produced wasn't even that good. I'll be honest with you. So what I was left with was like what I shot in the first instance, and actually I think some of the work was really, really quite moving. But I found it quite difficult. Obviously one of the photographs got into the Portrait of Britain, and which is probably obviously how you know about it. But I'm not massively happy with the work, but I'm struggling with it because I wanted it to say more than just a portrait, and at the moment it doesn't. So I've got to figure out a way. And obviously, like this year, I was hoping to go back. Last year I couldn't because I ended up having to work on. In fact, it was the Kaiser Chiefs gig that at Ellen Road. I got asked commissioned to do that on the same week as Download, and I needed the cash. I couldn't say no to that.
Yeah.
So I went off and did that. So this year I was hoping to go back to Download, and obviously we can't. So the project is furloughed.
Now until 2021.
Yeah,
maybe.
but it also gives me an opportunity now to reflect on, like, okay, well, how do I achieve those goals that, of putting a voice to disability in heavy metal? It's quite a challenge, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
It really is. So that's ongoing. That is ongoing.
Cool. Well, I'm excited for any project that's. I think it's a noble cause to turn the lens on heavy metal and the disability. I think that's a big story to tell. And there's two levels of outsider status going on there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's actually part of the overall narrative, is that heavy metal is the outsiders' music, and it always has been. And I think one of the reasons why, and people might ask me why Download. Well, because Download actually is the most welcoming festival you could ever imagine. Not just like the fans, but the staff and the crew and the promoters. Like, they look after people with disabilities. Like, there are bigger and better facilities and viewing platforms, and the camping is absolutely flawless for in the disability area. It's wonderful. And because heavy metal is the outsider music, if you're an outsider in the rest of your life, there you're not. No one is, and it doesn't matter if you're in a wheelchair, or if you've got an invisible disability, or you're just fucking there to watch Tool. It don't matter. Like, it really don't matter, and that's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
And that's also part of it. It was like, why I wanted to tell that story is because actually it's just to show the world, like, what a beautiful community of people like heavy metal is. I'd like to continue that, given the opportunity.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I hope you can soon. Yeah, awesome. Well, great to chat to you, Danny. I really appreciate it. Really, really great to hear your background and your story, man.
No worries. Thank you very much for having me on, bud. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I think it's really, really nice to talk about photography in a positive light, given how difficult everyone's circumstances are at the moment. So thank you very much.